Good afternoon, everyone. Shalom, I'm David Menzar, spokesman for the National Public Diplomacy Directorate in the Prime Minister's office. It's Thursday, May 15th, day 587 since the October 7th atrocities. Please put your questions in the chat with your name and news outlet. I've got a couple of brief points to share with you just before that, and then we'll get to your questions. Firstly, on the last night's terror attack, in a nation scarred by terror, last night's attack was especially cruel and vile at the most vulnerable moment of human life. Tsila Gez was 30 years old, a mother of three in the 9th month of her pregnancy. She was on her way to give birth. Last night, a Palestinian terrorist opened fire on Route 446 near Bruchin in Samaria. Tsila was murdered. Her husband, Hananel, was wounded. Doctors fought to save both lives. They managed to deliver the baby boy by emergency C-section. That poor child is now fighting for his life. This is not just another tragedy, it's the face of evil. A mother bringing life into the world, struck down by terror. The Prime Minister expressed the shock of the nation. This abhorrent attack shows the difference between us, who cherish life, and the terrorists who seek to destroy it, he said. To make that point, Hamas praised the murder. They called it heroic. The wave of brutal, indiscriminate terror is driven by Hamas and Iran. Their aim to kill our people, to spread chaos, to ignite new fronts. They will fail. The Prime Minister has entrusted our security forces to find and punish the killers and all those who help them. There will be no safe haven for terrorists in Judea and Samaria. The IDF is hunting them relentlessly. This week alone, a bomb factory was dismantled in Tulkarem, and Jenin's head of Islamic Jihad was eliminated. Israel will not rest. We will defend life proudly and without pause. Next to Gaza, Israel is intensifying its operations against Hamas in Gaza. Over 2,000 targets struck and hundreds of terrorists eliminated since fighting resumed. Hamas continues to use hospitals and schools as terror bases, a cruel violation of international law. The IDF and Shin Bet destroyed Hamas's infrastructure underneath the European hospital in Khan Yunis and eliminated key operatives hiding in Nasser Hospital. On the negotiations in Doha, the Prime Minister's confirmed that following the release of Idan Alexander, Israel has a team in Doha for negotiations to release the hostages according to the original Witkoff framework. Israel has already accepted, and the Hamas terror organization, of course, as usual, have refused to accept that Witkoff proposal. It's a phased deal. Israel, and the most important phase being Hamas must release hostages. Hamas keeps saying no. Lastly, on aid in Gaza, Israel continues to monitor the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The claims of famine are unfounded. They've always been untrue. They serve the interests of Hamas. Hamas exploits the aid to operate. It operates to loot the aid, to prevent it from reaching Gazans, and it uses it for its own purposes. The answer is extremely clear. The aid must be transferred to Gazans in a manner that prevents Hamas involvement. And that is precisely what we're working on together with our American allies. Okay, that's the end of our briefing here today. I will now take your questions. Please put your questions in the chat together with your name and your news outlet, and we'll take your questions. First question I can see here is from Abbas Al-Lawati from CNN. And Abbas, you've asked, the US-backed aid organization established to manage a new model for distributing humanitarian assistance in Gaza announced Wednesday that it would begin operating in the enclave by the end of the month and that Israel would lift its over 2-month blockade in the interim. Can you give us more details about that? And if indeed it will start operating by the end of the month? Thank you for that question, Abbas. Look, it's been very, very clear over this 19-month war that Hamas is profiting from the aid which has gone in, and unfortunately, UNRWA in particular, and others as well, have been looking the other way. During the last hostage release pause, over 25,000 aid trucks went in. There is still food in Gaza. Hamas are holding on to it. They need to open up the food to the people. Markets are open in Gaza. There is food. There's certainly no shortage. The real crisis is Hamas looting and selling the aid, taxing it and diverting it to the terrorists. Now, on your point, the US, I can share with you, has proposed a new aid mechanism, and it's designed to bypass Hamas. The important point, though, is that the UN needs to cooperate. Right now, they are refusing to cooperate, and the long and the short of it is they're effectively helping Hamas stay in business. There's no famine in Gaza. There's a famine of truth. When Israel opened their gates for aid, Hamas stole it, and the UN and many so-called human rights groups know this, but unfortunately they've traded facts for fanaticism. Some of these NGOs, I would say, they're no longer defending humanity. They defend Hamas, and the blood libel which has been spread against Israel is not just a lie, it's modern-day incitement to anti-Semitic hatred dressed in humanitarian drag. When it comes to the United Nations, warning of impending gloom, as they always have. Look, the United Nations has produced 367 reports on Gaza since October 7th. Not one serious analysis of Hamas's use of human shields has taken place. That's not an oversight. Now, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, they pretend to be neutral. They're not. They're ideological hit squads. These NGOs, they accuse Israel of terrible crimes while ignoring the plight of Israeli hostages. So that's what I can share with you when it comes to the latest American plans to get aid into Gaza. Where there is a hunger in Gaza, it is hunger orchestrated by Hamas, but our American allies are working on a plan to bypass Hamas and get the food directly to those that need it most. Next question from Joel Pollack at Breitbart News. Can you share information about the condition of the husband of Tzila Gez? Was he injured in the attack? Thank you for that question, Joel. The latest information that we have is that he was injured. I've seen his status as lightly injured. I know that he's been able to speak to his children about the catastrophe which has befallen that family and the killing of their mother. For further information, I would recommend that you contact the hospital where Hananel was treated. Next question. Does Israel feel encouraged by President Trump's insistence that Saudi Arabia, in Saudi Arabia yesterday, that an Iran deal must also include an end to supporting terror and proxy wars abroad? Thank you for that question, Joel. Look, when it comes to Iran, we are on precisely the same page as the Americans. President Trump, and specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has made the prevention of Iran getting a nuclear weapon the essence of his leadership, and because of the leadership by Prime Minister Netanyahu on this particular issue, we have prevented that from happening. But when it comes to Iran, the US and Israel both believe that it is simply not an option for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. It is simply not an option. And tied up with that, of course, is the insistence which President Trump made yesterday that their support for terrorism, the proxy regimes which they support, like the Houthis, like Hezbollah, which they have supported, like the Assad regime, which they propped up, which tumbled down once Hezbollah had been so dramatically weakened, that simply is no longer an option. So I believe that when it comes to this issue, the US and Israel are on precisely the same page because we understand, all of us understand, that it is simply not an option for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And further to that, let me also share that we very much thank President Trump and his special envoy Witkoff for their consistent support and their tireless efforts to return our hostages and to defeat Hamas in Gaza. And on Iran, the strong alliance between Israel and the United States is stronger than ever because it is based on a shared worldview and values. Next question I have here is also from Joel Pollack. Is Israel concerned about the lifting of sanctions on Syria, or could there be a trade between Tel Aviv and Damascus? Thank you for that question, Joel. Look, Israel's default position is always peaceful coexistence with its neighbours. That has always been our default position. Now, since October the 7th, Israel is not prepared to be laissez-faire when it comes to its security. We are simply not prepared. Israel will be proactive when it comes to our security. So I think that's about as much as I would say on that. So with that proactive aspect of Israel's security demands, when it comes to Syria, we do have a threat on our Syrian border. We're not going to allow the passage of forces and weapons from south of Damascus in order to establish itself in the area and threaten Israeli citizens and IDF activity. We've made a strong stand that any attempt to bring weapons south of Damascus will be thwarted, and our forces are prepared to protect the Druze villages in southern Syria and prevent the entry of hostile forces into the region. That said, I will end that answer as where I began, that Israel's default position is, of course, peaceful relations with all of its neighbours. But, of course, we believe in peace through actions rather than just words. That's the key point here. Okay, next question here is from Wira Davis from the BBC. There we go. Even the new humanitarian your question, Wira Davis. Even the new humanitarian foundation that's been tasked with replacing aid distribution has called for the lifting of the blockade. Is this something which the Israeli government will now do? Thank you for that question, Wira. I believe I've answered the question on aid into Gaza pretty comprehensively earlier in this briefing and in the questions that I've had already. So I think that can answer your question. Just a reminder that the 1.8 million tons of aid have gone into Gaza. Now, you're from the BBC, Wira, and I can tell you that that is enough to fill Wembley Stadium 80 times. During the 42-day period, when there was a hostage release pause, 25,000 aid trucks entered Gaza. So there is still food in Gaza. That's our assessment. That is Israel's assessment. There is still food in Gaza. But it is our objective to work with our American allies to try and solve the problems caused by Hamas, who are creating hunger as another tool to gain international sympathy. They don't care about their own people. They're not worried about Gazans dying. They wish more Gazans would die. But we want to work together with our American allies to ensure that when aid goes in, it bypasses Hamas and goes directly to the people in need. Okay, question from Slava Tarkovsky from RIA Novosti News Agency. How does the Israeli government perceive Trump's visit to the Arab countries in the region and the fact that Israel is not included in the tour? And the second part of your question, any comments on direct historical negotiations between Trump and the new ruler of Syria, as well as the proposal for a deal with Iran? Are there any advantages for Israel in these events? Thank you for that question, Slava. There's quite a bit in there. Look, in your first point about you say that how does Israeli government perceive Trump's visit to the Arab countries in the region and the fact that Israel was not included in the tour? Look, President Trump took office on January 20th this year. I think in the first days of February, Israel was the first country invited to the White House. The first international leader was Prime Minister Netanyahu. I was proud to be inside in that delegation. I stood in the Oval Office and I heard the president's commitment to this country, which is why Israel believes, and our Prime Minister believes, and our government believes, and our people know that we have had no better friend than President Trump in the White House. No better friend, no closer relationship ever than between that of the White House in Washington, D.C. and Jerusalem. The Prime Minister has also subsequently visited Washington again, so he's had two visits in that short period of time to Washington, D.C. So this notion of, this notion is just, I think, plainly erroneous. The Prime Minister and the President are in constant contact. The Prime Minister and Mr. Witkoff, his chief negotiator, are also in constant contact. There are no two nations which are closer than Israel and the US because we have shared values and a shared vision of the future as well as shared enemies as well. You've asked me about Syria, and I've shared with you our views on that. And are there any advantages for Israel in these events? Look, when it comes to Iran, yes, of course, Iran and the US have both made a commitment that it is simply not an option for Iran to gain nuclear weapons. Simply not an option. So one way or the other, whether through diplomatic means or through other means, that is our joint objective between our two nations to stop that from happening. Okay, next question here is from Joel Pollack from Breitbart News. Was the release of Eden Alexander truly unconditional, or did Israel agree to conditions to be revealed later? Thank you for that question, Joel. On Monday, when Eden Alexander was released, we shared with you that there were no conditions to this. This was done because Israel is unrelentingly putting pressure on Hamas together with the diplomatic push from the US. That's how this happened, this combination of the two things. Israel's pressure on this genocidal death cult terrorist organization, that military pressure together with the US, that's how Eden, thankfully, was brought home. And I would encourage you all journalists to check out what Eden's family have been saying about the conditions in which Eden was kept, the torture which he endured, the heavy sacks which were put on his head, the physical torture of him being starved, of him being put in a cage, of him being chained, of him being beaten. I would encourage you to look at that because I haven't seen any reports of that in any international media. Next question here is a second question here from Wira Davis at the BBC. The killing and the murder, you say, of a heavily pregnant woman, Tel Agez in the West Bank overnight was abhorrent, and the most right-minded people would call for the perpetrators to be dealt with in full accordance of the law. Would you apply the same logic and standards to those responsible for the wiping out of an entire family, 13 people, the Samor family in Khan Yunis? They were among 62 Palestinians killed in overnight airstrikes. Thank you for that question, Wira. As usual from the BBC, that is an abhorrent question because you seek to equate the democratic right of this country to defend itself and a terrorist organization hiding amongst its civilians. Let me tell you Israel's point of view when it comes to this point of view which you've just made. I'll be frank with you. Israel faces a moral paradox, and it's been created by Hamas. When we strike a military target and get condemned by you, Wera Davis, as you've just done now, or if we don't strike and then reward the use of human shields, Hamas deliberately embeds its commanders underneath hospitals, knowing that any Israeli strike, however legal and precise, will generate headlines which they can weaponize, which they do. It's a textbook case of asymmetric warfare. The IDF is punished, as you are seeking to do right now, for acting, and Hamas is rewarded for hiding amongst civilians. So, I don't know the details, specific details of the case you're talking about, but when Hamas turns hospitals into military bases, it forfeits their protection under international law. And we have a choice. Do we let arch criminals, terrorists, like Mohammed Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's brother, the de facto leader, one of the leaders of Hamas, do we let him live, or do we stop him? Now, if Israel doesn't strike when targets like Sinwar present themselves, then Hamas's human shield strategy wins. And the war loses its meaning in terms of its war, the war we have against Hamas. So this strike, particularly the ones against the Nasser hospital, it wasn't just legal, it was necessary. We always try to get innocent civilians out of harm's way if we possibly can. That is the reality, whether it's comfortable or not. And I would say to the BBC, who have acted with tremendous irresponsibility during this entire conflict. Number one, creating that documentary using the children of Hamas ministers. Number two, paying Hamas, physically paying British taxpayers' money going towards a terrorist, genocidal, death cult, terrorist organization. And of course, number three, the cherry on the cake is the BBC's insistence not to label Hamas a terrorist organization, despite the fact that the British government does rightly call it a terrorist organization. The BBC does not call it a terrorist organization. And we can be left in no doubt whatsoever, that the BBC does not consider the Hamas a terrorist organization, because it doesn't call it a terrorist organization, because it is sympathetic towards Hamas. That is what its actions, the BBC's actions, show extremely clearly. So these sorts of false equivalents which you're sending me now, they are offensive as they are supportive of Hamas. Okay, I've got another couple of questions here. I need to round up pretty quickly. Riccardo Cavalieri from RAI News 24. What are the status of negotiations in Doha with Hamas? Disregard this question if we, okay, which you've already asked it. Okay, so those status are, our team is in Hamas. They are mandated to get our hostages home. They are operating under the Witkoff proposals. Israel has accepted the Witkoff proposals. Till today, because they call for the release of our hostages, till today Hamas has not accepted. So, but we want them to succeed, but they will happen while there is military pressure on the terrorist organization. And last question here from Norway, TV2 Norway, Hilda Gran. How will the new foundation being set up to distribute aid in Gaza be able to replace the UN and other UN organizations when it's set up to only have a handful of distribution sites compared with the UN's 400 sites? Thank you for that question, Hilda. I've dealt quite specifically about this particular issue, and the point I would just simply make to you again is that we need to bypass Hamas when it comes to aid distribution. They steal the aid, they use the aid then to raise money, and they use that money to pay its terrorists and encourage them to become fighters on their behalf. That is what they do. They steal, they extort their own people, and they use that money to raise terrorist funds. So now the UN, and it's unfortunately UNRWA in particular, and I would put UNRWA in particular as a key offender. UNRWA have perpetuated this conflict. Number one, their education system. UNRWA's education system. Every single one of the terrorists which committed the atrocities of October the 7th came from UNRWA schools. The UNRWA educated the terrorists. Now, imagine in Norway's jails if you could identify the same education system of every single criminal in Norway's jails, that they came from the same school, the same education system. That is the case when it comes to UNRWA. They are thoroughly discredited. And number two, they teach what they teach in those educational institutions. They glorify jihad. They say that just a little bit longer we'll be able to uproot Israel. You'll be able to take over Haifa, Israeli cities, and Jaffa. You will be able to go back to those countries and we'll uproot the state of Israel, despite our 3,500 roots in this land. And of course, that Hamas actively embedded themselves, still today, embed themselves in UNRWA institutions, that UNRWA staff actually took part in the massacre, and that more than 1,000, almost 1,500 UNRWA employees are members of Hamas. They are members of Hamas. So I would say it's imperative, if you care about a better future for Gaza, that this discredited UN institution is moved away from anything to do with Gaza, because they have to have such a terrible record in perpetuating this conflict, looking the other way when Hamas have stolen the aid, and also their failure when it comes to education. Okay, my friends, that's the last question. Thank you for joining us today. We're available for questions or for interview or for anything else. In the meantime, you can get in touch with us in the usual way. Thank you for joining us this time. Please do stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.